Good morning. Today I'm going to be reading chapter 2 of Claudette Colvin. So chapter 2, Coot. To me, God loved everyone. Why would he curse just us? Claudette Colvin. Claudette. I was born Claudette Austin, September 5th, 1939, in Birmingham. My mom named me after Claudette Colbert, a movie star. Back then, supposedly because we both had high cheekbones. My biological father's name is C.P. Austin, and my birth mother's name is Mary Jane Gadsden. C.P. left my mother to look for a job, stayed away for a year, and came back just long enough for my sister Delphine to be born. Then he took off again. When he came back a third time and wanted to stay, my mother finally said no. When I was just a baby, I went off to live with my great aunt, Mary Ann Colvin, and my great uncle Q.P. Colvin in a little country town called Pine Level, about 30 miles down Highway 231 from Montgomery. Mary Ann and Q.P. are the ones I call Mom and Dad. They were a lot older than my birth parents, more like my grandparents' age, but I loved them both, and I was happy to be with them. I think the reason they took me is that their only child, Velma, was away teaching school most of the year, so they had plenty of room for me. Later, Delphine came to live with us too. So I grew up in a quartet. Mary Ann, Q.P., Delphine, and me. And our dog, Belle. And 2 horses. And lots of chickens, cows, and pigs. And right here you'll see a picture. Back then, while World War II was going on, whenever one of our hens would lay a bad egg, we'd mark it with an H for Hitler. People always said I was smart. I don't know about that, but I was inquisitive for sure. I wondered about everything and asked about everything. Why don't the stars fall? Where is Japan? Is it different from China? How did God make the earth so fast? In 6 days? Did he make the stars too? When Belle died, would she go to heaven? Shouldn't Easter be on a Monday? Weren't there supposed to be 3 days after the crucifixion? So it'd be Saturday, Sunday, Monday, right? The biggest mystery of all was how the white man came to dominate us. In the South, it was taught that white people were better than blacks. Somehow, they were the masters and we were there to work for them. My mom said white people thought God made them special. My Sunday school teacher said we had been cursed by one of Noah's sons. I didn't buy that at all. To me, God loved everyone. Why would he curse just us? My mom thought she was as good as anybody or anyone else. So did I. One day I told my pastor, Reverend H. Johnson, I don't want to serve a God that would have a cursed race. He seemed proud of me for saying that. I was a tomboy, tall and skinny and very fast, and I loved to be outdoors. I would climb trees as well as anyone. My best friend, Ann Ruth Baines, and I knew every trail and shortcut from Pine Level to our homes. A no trespassing sign meant nothing at all to us. In the summer, we would count the insect tracks in the sand across the road and try and figure out what bug made which track. We were walking to school together the first time we ever got close to a skunk, right out in the middle of the road. He ran up to pet it and got sprayed. The teacher took one sniff and sent us home. Pine Level didn't have much more than a few shacks for the sharecropper families, a schoolhouse, a church, and a general store. But I was at home in all of it. I floated free and slept at the homes of my mom's friends as much as in my own bed. They all raised me together. Some nights I ended up at Baby Tell's house. She lived in an old farmhouse. Some nights I ended up at Baby Tell's house. She was my mom's best friend, plump and short and always happy to see me. She lived in an old farmhouse, the biggest house in Pine Level. White people used to own it, and we never knew exactly how Baby Tell's family got it. Her attic was full of paintings and an organ and an old spinning wheel. Ann and I used to look out the attic window and pretend the Yankee soldiers were about ready to come charging over the hill. Other nights I slept at Mama Sweetie's, a tiny woman in her 60s who was the best reader in Pine Level. She had read the entire Bible many times. She had her own blue-covered Webster's dictionary. Mama Sweetie taught practically every child in Pine Level their ABCs and how to write their names and how to count to 100 using peanuts. She cooked for all the people when they came in from the fields. Baby Tell and Mama Sweetie were like sisters to my mom and mothers to me. They loved me to keep them company. My nonstop talking and constant questions seemed to drive my mom crazy, but it didn't bother them at all. They loved that about me. Our school was a one-room, white wooden building with red trim. Ann and I walked there together every day, lunch sacks in one hand, book sacks in the other. It had a pot-bellied stove in the middle and a picture of Abraham Lincoln on the wall. One teacher taught all 6 elementary grades and sat us in sections around the room, grade by grade, to a desk. The room was rarely full because students kept getting pulled away to do farm work. A farmer would just appear in the doorway and yell, "I need 2 boys to help with the cows," and they'd be out the door in a flash. I loved school. I memorized the Dick and Jane readers so my teacher would think I could already read. One day she asked me to read aloud, but I got way out ahead of the text. She couldn't figure out what was going on. She told my parents to take me to Montgomery to get my eyes checked. I learned the entire 2nd grade in advance by listening to Annie. She was a year older than me, and by hearing Mama Sweetie read from her Bible and her Webster's dictionary. When it came time for me to start 2nd grade, I could already read and write and spell and do some arithmetic. They tested me and told me to go sit with the 3rd graders. After that, I was always younger than the other kids in my class. I knew plenty of white people, and they knew me. You had to be very careful around them. They never called the adults Mr. or Miss or Mrs. They used their first names instead. Or sometimes they made up little nicknames to dominate us. I was Coot. A doctor gave that name to me when I was little to distract me from the shot he was about to give. He sang, "Oh, she's the cutest little thing," but it came out Coot, and the name stuck. I was very religious. Annie and I played church together out behind our house, setting up chairs and doing services. Her brother would be the pastor, or she would be since she was older. I'd be the shouter. The 2nd Sunday of every month, the Reverend H. Johnson came out from Montgomery and pastored a service at our little church in the country. We'd call it Big Meeting Sunday. People would flock in from everywhere in cars, wagons, whatever they could get to move. On a Big Meeting Sunday, we'd pull up to church at noon and wouldn't get home until dark. First, there'd be regular church, then a program, then a glee club competition, then another sermon, then different choirs would sing. You'd have food all day long and come home stuffed. I remember this one big meeting Sunday. I was riding on the back of the truck before the service started to go get ice at the general store. It was about 11 o'clock, and we passed Mr. Jones, the white man who owned our property, walking to his own church. It was hot, and he had his blazer slung over his shoulder. His Baptist church was just a short distance from the store. 45 minutes later, we were coming back with the ice, and we passed him again, walking the other way. He was already out of church? That was just one more thing that seemed different about white people. How could anyone serve God on Sunday in less than an hour? When Claudette turned 8, Marianne Colvin inherited a house in Montgomery. Excited to live in a place of their own, the family loaded their belongings, including a horse named Mac, into the back of a neighbor's cattle truck and pushed off for Alabama's capital city. Their new home was a small frame house in a tiny hilltop neighborhood sandwiched between two white subdivisions on Montgomery's northeast side. King Hill, as the neighborhood was called, consisted of 3 unpaved streets lined with red shotgun shacks and frame houses like the Colvins. Toilets were out of doors. Though King Hill had a city-wide reputation as a depressed and dangerous neighborhood, the Colvins found it to be an extremely close-knit community where people knew and looked out for one another. Neighbors sat on their front porches, fanning the humid air, while children played in a small nearby park with a recreation center. Sad at first to leave Annie and the open countryside, Claudette soon made her peace with city life. Claudette, I slept with Delphine in the back bedroom with our own little fireplace. She would say her prayers as fast as she could and then jump into bed, waiting for me to hurry up and finish mine. I was a serious prayer, asking for help in this and that, and blessing about everyone I knew. But Delphine just whipped through the Lord's Prayer and jumped into bed. As soon as I got in, she'd be talking and talking, asking me how to spell this word and that, and then she'd start singing songs she'd heard on the radio and twitching and squirming around with new dances. Delphine could keep me awake all night. I loved going downtown Montgomery. Hold on. So here is the Rex Theater for Colored People. Daddy QP had his own special chair in the front room, and no one else could sit in it. He was a small man, too small for the army, they said, but he was wiry and strong, and he could do anything. He had built our house in Pine Level, and there was very little he couldn't make, grow, or fix. And he was fun. On Sunday mornings, I'd sit on the floor next to him, and he'd read me the funnies. We had an electric fan, but we only used it on Sundays because it sucked down electricity so fast. We didn't get a TV until the bus boycott, but our radio ran off a battery that gave us about an hour at a time of white station. WSFM. SFA. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here, and I'm going to start a new recording because the program will only let about 15 minutes at a time. So we'll stop right here and wait for part 2.